November 1842. Father Edward Sorin stands at the edge of a frozen lake, looking out over 524 acres of northern Indiana wetland that the Catholic Church has given him to build a university. Beneath his feet crunch fallen leaves jacketed in frost and ice. In the places where the wet hasn't frozen solid, the damp chill seeps through to his feet. Already, Father Sorin's mind is working. His men will need sturdier boots. The land is more water than earth, or at least that's what the stories will tell. Marshes that flood in spring, ice that cracks and groans underfoot in winter. His breath makes clouds in the air. His companions see an impossible task. Sorin sees something else entirely. He's 28 years old, a French missionary priest with almost nothing, 7 brothers from his order, a few borrowed dollars, and a conviction that borders on madness. South Bend is close enough, a few miles southwest, but just far enough away that the brothers will feel alone in the midst of the enormous silence. The forests press in on all sides. The ground itself seems determined to swallow whatever they try to build, and sometimes it does. But Sorin doesn't quit. Through that first brutal winter, and the ones that follow, he and his brothers drain the wetlands, fell the trees, raise buildings from mud and faith and timber cut from their own forest. They smell like sweat and sawdust. Their boots are caked with the clay-thick mud that tries to suck them down with every step. They call it Notre du Lac, Our Lady of the Lake, a university in the wilderness, an act of defiance against everything practical and reasonable. The first years are lean and difficult. The land is hesitant to give way, but the school is built and the students attend, and then, just when it seems that the impossible dream has been realized, all of it burns down. They build again. During the coming years and decades, the campus will grow, and it will spout its own ecosystem of Catholic higher education. St. Mary's will welcome its first students in 1844, Holy Cross in 1966. These schools and their stories will become an indelible and inseparable part of South Bend, and it won't be too long before their leaders and legends begin to see their own names on off-campus street signs throughout South Bend, a reminder that what starts as stubborn faith in a frozen marsh can pay off in wildly unexpected ways. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series, we are going for a drive around South Bend, where we are going to tell the important, zany, strange, and unexpected tales behind just a few of its street names. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertisements is made possible by the generous underwriting of all 8 episodes in the series by the Doug Hunt family. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at a few, but certainly not all, of the local roads that are named after leaders and legends from Notre Dame and St. Mary's. We're going to start with one you might not have ever heard of before. Maybe you've never seen Kintz Avenue, and if you have seen it, it's certainly possible you've never noticed it. It's easy to miss. Kintz Avenue runs just off Juniper and just north of the toll road for less than half a mile. Juday Creek runs through the place, and there's an enormous new home at its western terminus. You might have driven past it 100 times without seeing a street sign, and I know that I certainly had, but Kintz Road is a road with a story worth telling. Peter Kintz was born in Pennsylvania in 1838, married to Mary in Ohio, and settled in South Bend during the population explosion of the 1860s. The couple had 11 children together. 9 of them would survive into adulthood. And then, in 1891, they purchased the land along the road that would become their namesake. The seller of that land was none other than the university's own Father William Corby, a shrewd deal made at 7% interest that would benefit each person involved before all was said and done. The Kinses farmed their land, and they found an immediate buyer for their goods right next door. Receipts and invoices show that Notre Dame purchased meat, eggs, and milk from the nearby Kintz farm. Besides that, the enterprising Kintzes were more than willing to work off their debt, performing maintenance around campus and assisting with construction in order to expedite their mortgage payments. The family quickly established a routine. Summers were spent on the farm. Winters were spent working for the university. In 1896, while the Kintz family was still working through their mortgage payment, Father Corby announced plans to construct a stone grotto on campus that would be roughly a one-third replica of the Lourdes Grotto in France. The new shrine would be a rock cave, and construction was going to require a lot of rocks. The Kintzes had painstakingly cleared their farmland along Jude Creek and had a collection of rocks they were anxious to get rid of. Peter's three youngest sons, John, Edward, and Andrew, were commissioned for the work, hauling wheelbarrow loads of stones and boulders almost exactly a mile from the family farm to the grotto. By the end of 1896, the grotto was dedicated and opened to the public. And by 1901, the Kintzes had paid off their loan, nearly 20 years ahead of schedule. But the family legacy didn't nearly end with the construction of the grotto. John Kintz was a star pitcher for the Clay Township Baseball Club. The catcher for that team, James Luther, would go on to marry John's sister, Cecilia. Their grandchildren would go on to become the Roamers. Other descendants from the Kintz line would become town councilors, lawyers, veterans, and influential sisters at St. Mary's College. Many of them would graduate from the University of Notre Dame, and they'd carry the story of the place's progeny with them. Whenever they'd go to light a candle, they'd remember where that grotto came from, and maybe it even felt a little like home. Mary Kintz died in 1921. Peter followed closely behind in 1923. Both are buried in the Cedar Grove Cemetery, not 700 yards from the landing spot of the rocks from their farm. Kintz Road was given its proper and appropriate name in 1950. Let's take a quick break, but when we come back, we're crossing over to St. Mary's, and we're telling a story of what is likely the only local street named after a woman.
Are you ready for speed and excitement? Then come on out to Springbrook Park for the fastest sport in the land. Bicycle races will be held on the brand new cinder track on Tuesday, August 4th, 1896. Witness the speed, the thrills, the agony, and the glory, all during the bicycle races at Springbrook Park. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Angela was not the last name of Angela Boulevard's namesake. It wasn't even her first name or her middle name either, at least not at birth. The namesake of Angela Road was born Eliza Maria Gillespie in 1824 in Pennsylvania. The young Miss Gillespie was born into a well-to-do household and counted plenty of notable Americans among her relatives, including presidential candidate James Blaine and Civil War General William Tecumseh Sherman. Little Eliza was equally destined for greatness, but her path, as it often did for women of her time, was destined to lead down a much different road. Eliza Gillespie was uniquely lucky to receive a full education, first at a small private school, then at the School of the Dominican Sisters in Somerset, Ohio. By the time she was 20, she'd graduated from the Georgetown Visitation Monastery. Thanks to her impressive education and her more impressive family connections, the young woman became a fixture in the Washington, D.C. social scene of the 1840s. But her heart was pulled in a humbler direction. By 1853, Eliza, then nearly 30 years old, had decided to become a nun. She was all set to receive her habit, but had just one thing she wanted to do before she made the ritual complete. She wanted to say goodbye to her brother, a seminarian at Notre Dame, that small Catholic school in South Bend, Indiana. She met Father Edward Sorin during that trip, and it was a fortuitous meeting. In 1853, Gillespie took her vows and made her rites, taking the name Sister Mary of St. Angela. By the end of her life, she would be known to everyone around her as Angela Gillespie, or Sister Angela, and later, Mother Angela. 2 years later, in 1855, Mother Angela was made the Superior of St. Mary's Academy, a small Catholic girls' school in Bertrand, Michigan. By the time 1855 was ended, Mother Angela had moved the school to its present location, just across the street from the University of Notre Dame. Mother Angela came from quite a legacy of East Coast elites, but her family was now carving their own legacy around South Bend, Indiana. Her brother had been Notre Dame's first graduate and would later become a vice president at the university. Mother Angela was responsible for bringing St. Mary's to town and for growing it during the decades to come, and somehow that was just the beginning. During the Civil War, Angela Gillespie organized a corps of 80 Sisters of the Holy Cross to serve as nurses, and after the war ended, she didn't slow down. In 1869, Gillespie was elected Superior General of the American Sisters of the Holy Cross and helped to establish more than 30 schools, institutes, and hospitals across the United States, many of which remain to this day. She represents the beginning of Notre Dame's Ave Maria publication, which would later become the Ave Maria Press. But most of all, she was committed to St. Mary's, living on and working at the campus until her death in 1887 at the age of 63. Mother Angela's death was a sad day in South Bend. The newspaper ran a loving commentary from Edward Sorin, and the obituary the paper wrote for her was absolutely heartfelt. Just as the chimes of Notre Dame pealed the hour of 11 yesterday forenoon, the spirit of Mary of St. Angela, the beloved Mother Angela, took its flight. Her death was so quiet, so peaceful, so like the calm, sunshiny April day that had dropped into the March calendar, that those who watched beside her scarce knew that she had gone. There was no struggle with the dread angel of death. She seemed to have welcomed it, as one who is tired in body and weary in mind welcomes sleep. So happy was the expression on the beloved features that as those who loved her most looked upon her face, they could only think she was sleeping, while her brain was busy with pleasant dreams. So far as I can tell, Angela Avenue, now Angela Boulevard, was named in her honor in 1902. That's not all, though. The Gillespie Center is named after Mother Angela Gillespie. She is buried in the Our Lady of Peace Cemetery. When we come back from the break, our story ends the only place it ever could, with Sorin Street, Father Sorin, and the off-campus neighborhood Notre Dame's founder built for the people who were building his institution.
Attention, all liquor dealers. Hear this urgent message from Father Thomas Walsh, President at the University of Notre Dame. Father Walsh wants to give you notice that he intends to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law any liquor dealer who will sell liquor to students or in any way assist them in procuring it. You have been warned. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
This episode is going to end at the same place it began, with Notre Dame's Father Sorin and his unrelenting quest to plant a lasting institution on the very edge of South Bend, Indiana. Father Sorin is certainly worthy of his own podcast episode, and maybe several of them. His life was too big, and his influence remains too massive to compress his entire story into the few minutes that we have left. So instead, we're going to focus on his road, Sorin Street, and the neighborhood around it, a place known as Sorin's Subdivision. I've spoken with plenty of people who assume, given everything that's transpired with the university since its founding, that Father Sorin must have been an Irish Catholic missionary priest. How else could you explain the school's indelible ties with everything Irish and Ireland? But Father Sorin wasn't Irish. He was French, and so were the handful of brothers he brought with him as part of his quest to build a school. He did not come with a goal to serve Irish populations, and nothing of his original ambition mentioned anything about the Irish. Of course, and Father Sorin would have told you this himself, sometimes the Lord moves in mysterious ways. Father Sorin arrived on the land that would become campus in 1842. By 1843, he'd managed to open the school with the construction of a single building, today's Old College, a 2-story brick structure that is one of the very oldest remaining buildings in St. Joseph County. As the school grew, it needed more buildings, more than Sorin and his brothers could build themselves. When parts of the campus burned down in 1849 and again in 1855, it needed those new buildings faster than Sorin and his brothers could build it themselves. They needed to hire a crew. They needed to hire a large crew, and they needed to hire it in a hurry. At the same time that Notre Dame was being built and rebuilt, a fungal infection called Phytophthora infestans was ravaging potato crops across Ireland. 1 million people died. Another 1 million left, stuffing themselves into passenger ships bound toward the other side of the Atlantic. When they got there, they were going to need jobs, and Notre Dame was a place that was always hiring. Sure, the leaders of this school were French, but at least they were Catholic, and so were these new Irish. Father Sorin held complex and sometimes contradictory views about the Irish. He called them noble and heroic, but he also called them foul-tempered and vindictive. One thing he never called them was the Fighting Irish. That nickname wouldn't come into play until 30 years after Sorin's death. Despite his sometimes unflattering views of the Irish, Sorin was at least eager to hire them, and there were plenty of other places that weren't, establishing unwritten and sometimes explicit no Irish policies. Here's what happened next. Father Sorin hired enough Irish laborers that those laborers established their own sense of Irish community in South Bend. That sense of Irish community invited more Irish immigrants to South Bend, a place where they could discover at least the smallest pocket of something that felt like home. Father Sorin rarely took his eyes away from the building of Notre Dame, but by the 1850s he took on another mission, one at least tangentially related to the building of his school. He acquired 120 acres just south of campus and built a neighborhood so that the Irish immigrants and their families could have a permanent and decent place to live. The area became known around South Bend as Little Dublin. On land deeds, the area is still called Sorin's Subdivision. The area is dotted with the names of campus figures and Catholic saints: Corby Boulevard, Rockne Drive, Walsh Street, Kavanaugh Drive, Notre Dame Avenue. Lawrence Street is likely named after one of the brothers who arrived in South Bend alongside Father Sorin. And then there are the saints, each one chosen specifically and deliberately. St. Vincent, the patron saint of brickmakers. St. Louis, the patron saint of construction workers. St. Joseph, the patron saint of immigrants. Notably, there is no St. Patrick Street, and this too may have been a deliberate choice. Sorin welcomed Irish immigrants in droves, but was quick and often explicit in encouraging them to Americanize themselves as quickly as possible. For a time, he even banned the celebration of St. Patrick's Day on campus. As Irish immigration exploded into the New World, the Irish would become the most dominant part of America's Catholic population. When second and third generation Irish Catholics looked to further their education, they found a Catholic school in South Bend, a place largely built by Irish hands and abutted on several sides by Irish neighborhoods. But cutting an east-west line through the center of that neighborhood was Sorin Street, named after the French priest who had built the subdivision and originated all of the reasons that the subdivision needed to be built in the first place. The street is still there, and so is the neighborhood, although increasingly, its homes are welcoming transients and travelers of a different ilk, made into student housing and short-term rentals that fill up on game day weekends. Father Sorin lived a long life, dying in 1893 at the age of 79, long enough to see his university become a notable Catholic institution, long enough to see the Golden Dome, and yes, long enough to see Notre Dame's first ever football game. He is buried in the Holy Cross Cemetery at the university, not far from the lake he first saw in 1842. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Thanks again to the Doug Hunt family of South Bend for underwriting this episode and all 8 episodes in the series. In our next episode, we are going to visit some of the streets named after South Bend's earliest pioneers, and I hope you'll tune in for that one next. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.